Okay, recording has started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Nova Scribes. This is a great platform that is also partnering with IFVP. This is for all sorts of visual practitioners. So if you use visuals to communicate, you are welcome here. And if you're here to learn, you're also welcome here. My name is Angela Krieg. I'm the host. I usually don't sound like a 90-year-old smoker. However, given the time of year, that's just what I sound like. So you'll hear me at some other point. But I'm going to be drinking a lot of tea on screen, just trying to soothe the laryngitis. Today we're doing how to facilitate when you're not a facilitator, and I'm joined by these incredible facilitators, including Casey, who's just rejoining. We got Casey Creech, we've got Elise White, we've got Sheri Kennedy, we've got Rachel Thompson, and last but certainly not least, Brian Tarallo. Thank you everybody for being here. I don't, if you want to say where you're coming from, please put it into the chat. Just write it in. And I'm coming from Boston, so it's a balmy like 40 degrees here. And Sheri told me that we're going to be getting more snow. So if I'm gonna just pass it over to the participants or not the panelists. And if you just want to say where you're coming from quickly, we'll get started with going through the questions that I have for you as the moderator.
I guess I'll kick off. Hi, I'm Brian. I'm in transit right now. I'm headed from Virginia to Tennessee.
And I'm Casey. I spent the last 2.5 days with Brian. We kicked him out of Virginia down to Tennessee where my parents live. Hey, fabulous to be here. Thanks for pulling us together, Angela.
Of course.
I'm Elise. I'm based in Washington, D.C. right now. It's a beautiful 60 degrees, so I'm very grateful for that.
I'm Rachel Thompson. I am in Cary, North Carolina, where it's a lovely 75 degrees. So we're not competing, but kind of are.
And I'm Sheri Kennedy. I am calling in from beautiful Watertown that I call 45 minutes from anywhere within reasonable zone of Boston and right near Angela. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So that's where some of our people are coming from. I'm sure that we've got people from all over the US, probably, although I assume more in the Eastern time zone.
Outside also. I'm Arend. I'm calling in from Amsterdam, Netherlands. It's 10 degrees here, centigrade.
So that's like I think that's like 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
I
But
wouldn't know.
don't quote me. A zero means frozen. Zero means frozen. That's what we know. 32 in Fahrenheit means frozen here.
Yes, zero means freezing, and 100 means boiling.
Yeah. We don't got that logic. The ship that was going to bring over the new system of temperature sunk on the way to America, so we never ever switched. That's at least what I've heard. I don't know how true it is. So again, thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to get started with the questions for this session of how to facilitate when you're not a facilitator. The first question I'm going to ask to the panelists is, can you each provide one example of a scenario that might have been in need of a facilitator for them to step in? This can be professional or personal. Casey, you go.
Almost every time I see one of my executives in their meeting, it's a perfect time to step in, where they say, any questions, to a group of 60, 80, or 100 people. And then the same 3 people speak up every time, right? That's a good time where, because in that moment you got to ask, who's that for? Is it for the audience or for the executive, or is it for a time constraint? So I think it's always a good moment to, before you ask any questions to a large group, to give them some time to actually think through if there are any questions before the large group. Maybe have a small discussion about those questions, because that way people might actually ask a question instead of starting off with something like, back in 5th grade, Miss Bellamy, my math school teacher, she had this phrase, and then they go on, and 6 minutes later they actually get to the question. So it might help at the beginning of the sessions to actually think about having the audience engage on what they want to discuss before you just ask them to speak out of the blue.
Yes. Sheri?
Sure. So I had the pleasure of working with a group recently that recognized for themselves that they needed a facilitator because it was a small nonprofit that kind of runs themselves, and there were some really big decisions to make, and there were multiple camps. So they knew that none of them could legitimately direct the conversation without having someone who is unbiased and from the outside. So that's was not an in the moment thing. That was a predetermined, we're going to need a facilitator for this conversation thing. But that's, I think anytime when you've got contentious or challenging dynamics is a really good time for someone to step into that unbiased facilitator role.
I would agree.
I think one thing I'll add, something that came up as I was thinking about this, was those kind of moments where you hear like someone say, "Oh, everyone's professionals, or everyone's adults, they'll figure it out," and you're like, "But will they? No, no, they won't. They'll just kind of wander around, not actually do anything, not actually accomplish anything. Like there's nothing structured. Like they will not figure it out." It's those moments where people are like, "Oh, we're all adults. Well, we're all like people." Yes, you are. And also, the facilitator helps get those brains moving in the same direction, and hopefully the direction the group wants to go.
Yeah, I would say the only situation I've seen where they will be adults is if it if it has anything to do with food. If it's like they'll adults, they'll figure out how to feed themselves. People will order their own lunch. I think usually, don't quote me, but I would say besides that, Rachel, I fully agree with you.
Yeah. But also sometimes in that case, it's like people need to know like you're responsible for ordering your lunch and it's not provided. Like if
That's
there's no direction at all, then they're like, wait, is lunch included? Should I order it? Is like yeah.
yes. Oops.
I can give a personal example. I am a middle child. I have two sisters, and they are both mental health professionals. So one of their favorite pastimes is to get into like this psychoanalysis debate where they're talking about different approaches to the same case. And sometimes the debate is the fun, but other times the goal of the time together is harmony. And so I can be an outsider as one who doesn't have the lingo, but when I notice that they're using two separate mental models to come to the same conclusion, then I might identify it as, a time where I can ask some leading questions and facilitate them towards harmony. So that's what came up for me.
Is it about debate or is it about harmony? That's a great way to run almost me. Are we here to debate or are you trying to get to some harmony, right?
Exactly.
If you had to choose two spectrums, which one we want to deal with?
Yeah.
If we had to choose, which one do you want to focus on?
Very much. Brian, you do not have to go, but do you have an example?
I agree with my colleagues. The only thing that I'd add is in chat, if you want to have an extraordinary conversation, and by that I mean a conversation that is outside of the ordinary. If you want to have the same conversation you've always had in your organization, you don't need a facilitator. If you want to do something that's different, you bring in a facilitator.
Would agree. Would agree. To move on to the next question. By the way, for everybody here, I'm not a facilitator. I just get to be around cool cats who are. So the reason I did this call is happening is because I said I want to learn about this, and some other people said follow your energy, set it up. So here we are. So this is also I'm learning. I'm not going to have a lot of input besides I know situations where I can see situations that can be stepping up, but sometimes I don't have the background to be able to say, is this my own like stress happening or is it somebody who needs to step in? So going on to the second question is, what identifiers in a situation point to the need for facilitation? We kind of just answered that, but like, are there pain points specific that you say that light your brain up and say, darn, facilitator needed, or this is an example of why this job exists? Rachel.
I mean, I think we definitely touch on this, but if a conversation is going in circles, I think that's definitely a call for a facilitator. Or if a decision is not being made, like, which is kind of the same thing.
Brian wrote high conflict, high stakes, high complexity.
And what if I can double click on one other thought that just came up about what kind of conversation we're having. I was just reminded of like a great article that I read a long time ago about types of conversations, and sometimes the value of having the conversation before the conversation. Like when we get this meeting together, what is I mean, most facilitators know you come up with a goal. So part of that goal is determining, are we having a conversation to make a decision? Are we having a conversation to brainstorm and just generate a ton of ideas? Are we having a conversation to figure out how we're going to execute this plan that we've already put in place? And just having the explicit conversation about what kind of conversation you're about to have can stave off a lot of confusion and frustration. I don't know how many of you are in relationships with somebody where this kind of thing is also could be helpful. Like, are we having a conversation about what might we do for vacation this year, or are we deciding, you know, which, what's the level of investment, what's the level of, what's the information we need to have prepared in order to have that decision? A lot hangs on the what kind of conversation are we having.
Yeah. To kind of piggyback off that, Sheri, I saw a TED Talk earlier today that was just TED Talks, they still exist. It was just a TED Talk simply on like how to have better conversations, and the way that this guy organized things was into three categories about like, are you having a conversation about, like the facts, logistics? Are you having a conversation about how we feel? Or are we having a conversation about like who we are and like explaining like ourselves? And just like having or sometimes do you need a hug? Do you need to be told what to do? And that's a big part of it, as you say, like like if somebody's ready to debate and the other one wants to feel heard, that's going to lead to a lot of conflict.
I would say also, Angela, to build on that, when you notice that there are certain voices that have been minimized or don't have a platform, and you identify that their perspective is necessary to further the goal, I think that that's a really good identifier for when a facilitator might be necessary.
Often our role is attention management. Where do we keep their attention at? And I kind of put something in chat is that every time, especially in a virtual meeting, even an in-person meeting, whatever you're trying to do is competing with every email and text and other distraction they have during the event. So the question you need to ask, or someone should be asking, is that where do you want them to focus? Do you want to focus on what they're working on, or do you want them to focus on the next text or email that comes in their inbox? And that's a skill that great facilitators have, is where they maintain their focus. And also allowing them to disconnect when they need to and know they'll have times to go through and check their things that might be screaming in the back of their head. Because I think one of the biggest challenge people have is we get through great things by focusing, and it's all the minor distractions that come up and are pulling our attention away from what really matters, where a lot of that frustration can come up to build upon what Elise said of are we here to debate, or are we here to have harmony? And if we can help maintain their focus in one direction, ideally in the harmony state, yeah, that's I think that's where you need a facilitator, or at least someone who can hold people's attention for a given period of time.
I'm a great example of that. I'm very hyperactive. I get distracted easily. And in group situations, the way that I do that is by yapping. And so the idea of having somebody that helps, like I have to do it, of course, myself when I am an adult, but having somebody that can help hold attention when people start flowing out for whatever reason that is great. And I mean, one thing I think that great facilitators do is they know what a break is. There's been a lot of meetings that it's a 3-hour meeting, and You get one bio break and it's at the end. So, okay, I'm going to move on to the next thing. So we've established situations and like red flags you see that say, okay, there needs to be a facilitator. I need to do this. Wait a minute. There isn't supposed to be an official facilitator, whatever it is. How do you establish trust as the unofficial facilitator? You've decided you're going to do this. How do you say, hey, I'm not supposed to be here as a facilitator, but here we are? How would you approach that situation? How do you establish that trust? Brian, did you raise your hand? Yes, he did.
I think I did, yeah. Okay, so we're shifting the conversation a little bit to say, we find ourselves in a meeting. Maybe we're there as a working group or as a team, and nobody has been tapped to be the explicit facilitator, right? So how do you pull some facilitative methods into that space when you haven't been blessed and ordained the facilitator, right? From my own perspective, I think the best way to do it is kind of like what Casey just dropped in the chat: facilitation judo, right? Um, and he's not wrong. In martial arts, one of the techniques is to give your opponent an opening, which you kind of bring them into. And in facilitation, or at least what we might call shadow facilitation, when you're not the lead facilitator, when you don't have that role, is to provide openings. And I think a good way to do that is with Sheri's got one option for you, is to pull out the markers and just say, all right, well, let's get this on the board, right? Let's get some visualization around this thing. Let's attack the idea and not the people. And one way to do that is to visualize it. Another good way to do it, to provide space for the people in the room to move into, is to ask questions. When you provide a gap, people's tendency is to want to fill it. And so questions do that very well. Visual templates do that very well. Silence does that very well. And sometimes I think it's really about knowing what question will move the group dynamic from where they are to where they should be going. Moving from that maybe that, as you were saying before, is it about harmony or is it about decision making, right? Maybe there's been too much harmonizing where we've been doing some groupthink and we've been, oh yeah, that's a good idea, but like, okay, what's the decision that comes out? So anyway, I think it's a few things that you can do. You can pull out the markers, you can ask a question, you can actually just create some silence and people will fill that space.
Really good insight.
Yeah, I would ditto all of that and add the idea of, again, reflecting it back into the room of kind of what were we trying to accomplish today, like, and maybe offering, say, to the group, would it be okay if we did this, depending on the group, but again, asking the question of what are we trying to accomplish today, like what was the purpose of the meeting? I'm observed, like maybe like I'm noticing that we're like talking about this thing. I thought the meeting's about that thing, and really kind of the I-centered language of I'm noticing this. Do we want to keep going this, or do we want to like kind of a little bit of questioning and having that open loop, and then also kind of maybe offering of I have an idea for how we might get back on track and things like that. That's one way I might approach that, kind of building off of Brian's.
Aaron had a interesting situation. He mentioned essentially, it looks like, I'm kind of reading through his note here, employee engagement survey. The numbers weren't too good, and the manager asked people to step forward and speak out right there what their thoughts were. And he mentioned crickets, right? He says, I'm itching to step in and bring in safety into this instance. Wonder how you'd handle the situation. And so I said, how would I handle that? So he asked the question. My thoughts are, hey, boss, I got a crazy idea. Hey, boss, hey, how about we ask people to pair up and share their ideas with each other, and then have small group discussions, and then we ask to open up the entire group. And that's one way to do that. And also, yeah, think, write, share is a perfect one. Everyone think about it, write down what they're thinking. So think for a minute, write for a minute, then share. So yeah, I'm always a fan of I'm one of thinking as an individual, sharing in small groups, then before you open up the log session. Or think, draw, share, even better. Yeah. Um, Now, I feel like I'm taking all the airways here. One of the things that I think Angela's trying to ask is how do you establish trust in an unofficial facilitator role? I'll speak from my experience. One of my clients I was working with for 2 years, I would just take visual notes during the meeting, and then I'd hand them to whoever's leading the meeting at the end. And every time they start coming to me and asking, "Hey, you got a meeting coming up. What are your thoughts on that?" So sometimes in the moment, it might not be the best time to shadow facilitate. It might take a longer play as you're building trust up with the group. And I found that helpful doing kind of like Angela has behind her, what is graphic recording. Just take visual notes of what the person said and then share it with them and just give it to them at the end. Here's what I observed.
It's really, I'm going to have to try that personally. Something else I kind of am noticing from what you guys were saying about um, is with the idea of like the think, write, share, or 1 minute, so on and so forth, is you're also establishing team bonding a little bit as a facilitator, or at least the way that you've shared and how you'd approach it is that it, as you say, Aaron said there was crickets. So you're making it so that when you share, you're not just the only one that's saying, I found the way that you called me a jerk not to be a great way to make me more productive. But if he's calling, if there's an entire group that they're all on the same page and be like, hey, don't call us nicknames. It feels more you know that you might not be singled out as much. And it establishes a team bond where everybody's having a similar experience.
Yeah. Brian just pointed out my raised hand was blending into my background. So I want to also, you know, applaud all those responses and also sort of add another phrase for but what both Rachel and Casey were alluding to, the mirroring back. So as a way of building trust, finding language like what I'm hearing from the group is, or what I'm again, Rachel said what I've noticed is. So that sort of puts you in that role of this is not my opinion, this is what I'm observing from the ether here. And the question that I often follow up with, is that right? Or, you know, does that, is there more? Is there something missing? So that it's leaves it a little bit open-ended. And also to respond, I had one more thought on Aaron's question there. Also sort of acknowledging in a situation like that where there's a question asked and everybody's totally silent, there could be a really good reason why there's not engagement, right? People have that fear. And so I like to address rooms like that. Like one of the things that a facilitator can get good at, I'm still working on that, is like reading the energy of the room. So if the energy of the room is like, people are afraid to speak, putting some language around that that's really gentle, like, well, I have a suggestion, boss. Not everybody is as quick to run their mouth off as me. Perhaps we give people a minute to think on their own, and and then you can lead into the think, write, share, and also having like adding to the ways that people can be anonymous. Rachel, you had a good comment there about and ways of creating anonymity. Um, Sometimes I've actually had people write things on pieces of paper, throw them into, one big container, and then everybody grabs one to read and you don't know whose it is. So adding to that level of safety of like, I'm going to put my real thought in here, knowing that it's not going to have my name attached to it. That can be really important for some groups.
I want to
I
add,
wanna
oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Brian.
Rachel. You first. Yep, you
Oh,
first.
I was gonna say I just added like there's a note in the chat about the manager didn't want help, and I might kind of say, okay, sure, and then maybe depending on the context, be like, has this kind of how to phrase it, but like, has this worked in the past? Like, do people usually speak up? Have you gotten good feedback in this way in the past? I'd have to figure out a way to phrase that more um, gently and more inquiry than that, but maybe kind of being like,
Yeah.
if has this worked in the past and it's just maybe not working now specifically, or are you doing the same thing and hoping for um, different results, but getting the same results?
Rachel, you were one of the few people that I know that does closed-ended questions really well. Yeah, has this worked in the past? That's a good one as far as closed-ended questions. I want to build on that. I also want to build on what Sheri was saying about reading the room energetically, because this is something that I had to learn the hard way, right? And I find that body language is a good way to read the room. Assuming that we're all present. And there's a Kaner technique. I can't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head, but it's the way of actually naming the body language that you're seeing. So, for example, I'm noticing a lot of furrowed brows, or I'm noticing a lot of smiles. I'm seeing a lot of people with folded arms. Tell me about that. What's going on there? I like to say the phrase, I'm seeing a lot of frankly faces, which is like a portmanteau of frowning and wrinkly. I'm noticing a lot of frankly faces, and it's kind of a light way of saying that. Tell me what's going on there. And I like to do that rather than going out on a limb with judgment and saying, frankly, Casey, frankly, not frankly, frankly, with an I. Um, Rather than going out on a limb and saying, "Hey, Bob, you that seems like it really ticks you off. Are you ticked off right now?" Because that's a judgment on my part. I have no idea what his inner dialogue is doing. And so if I think even if you're not the facilitator, you can do what I think we've all been talking about, which is going up to the balcony and making some observations about the group dynamic as a way of naming it. I also think, to Rachel's point, sometimes you find yourself as a non-facilitator, as a team member with a manager, and they just don't care about, good group dynamics. Rachel might ask the question, has this worked in the past? And they're like, well, who cares? I'm the boss. I tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other side of this is you kind of have to know how far you can push your role. And if they're not willing to go there with you, if you do ask a good open-ended question, or a question that, is intended to move the group dynamics, and they don't go there with you, then, well, half of communication is the other party. Are they ready to listen? If they're not ready to listen, there's not much you can do about that.
And I'll
Yeah.
build upon one thing there is that I love how Brian says, I'm seeing a lot of frankly faces. If people aren't feeling frankly, they will correct you. No, we're not being frankly, so, oh, no, we're joyful, so you can use this to your advantage. One way to do this is, especially in a situation where you might be doing some shadow facilitation. Um, Hey, boss. Hey, Steve. Hey, Sarah. Hey, last time we did Q&A, it seemed like we had crickets. Um, there's something I learned recently that a way to get less crickets in the audience. We ask people to share their ideas with each other before we open up for questions. Then you say something like, is that a dumb idea? Odds are they will say, no, it's not. And if they say it is a dumb idea, you say, well, boss, how do we make it less dumb? So it's a nice little way to set up, because their natural instincts to say no, especially if they feel like they're in control or something like that. So you ask them, is it a dumb idea, or is it a stupid idea? Is this an idea that's not going to work? And if they say yes, it's not going to work, well, how do we make it work? It's a subtle way to shift that forward.
Yeah. And I like that. I totally agree. And I have another thing I want to add, kind of from a thing Brian said. I think either as a facilitator, but also especially as a shadow facilitator, when you're kind of wanting to help a group, you also have to really consider your needs and your situation. And going back to the manager, like I had a boss where I recognized the distinction between sometimes, and he was like, when he was pulling rank, he was like, I'm the boss, do what I say, which is different than exercising authority. Like sometimes the boss like needs to like make the decision, or choose for the make the decision because he's the boss. But the pulling rank is at a different emotional tenor. And so much later, I had those observations, but then I recognized when which was happening. And I knew that if he was pulling rank, then I really didn't have, like, it wasn't this, I didn't have the emotional safety to interject or to try and help or do the thing. But if he was exercising authority, I could. But that required me to have, like, to pay attention to the nuances and also have the emotional safety. And even like there might be like job safety, might be like all sorts of things to consider. And sometimes it's not worth it. Like sometimes like this is just going to be a sucky meeting. I could help, but there's too much at stake for various situational things, and you just make the choice not to. Like you might offer in some light ways and try and help in others, but sometimes you're like, not my circus, not my monkeys. I'd love to help, but also not my circus, not my monkeys.
Sheri, feel free to go. You're actually touching on the next question. So, Sheri, please go. You're totally good. But then I'm just letting you know. Elise, if
Yeah.
there's something you really need to say, please let me know. But
No, we're taking a lot of air here.
it's okay. It's good. We don't have to, this is what I'm hoping. It's great to hear you guys converse.
This sort of brought up a I don't know if this is a different question. You can take or leave this question, but um, I- related to that situation that we're talking about, where the leader might be pulling rank, I am curious if others have the experience sometimes where you're working with a leader who has like the fragile ego, and you've recognized that. I've been in certain situations where that's been my boss, and sometimes it's been the person that I'm working with on a temporary basis. And what do you do? Well, what do you do? I'll leave it that open-ended.
Oh, Elise. Okay, go, go, go.
Yeah, I have a thought here that's kind of building off of the last question about building trust as an unofficial facilitator. I often have some luck with using straw man. So I find that essentially people really like to help you and reframing a situation in terms of like, can you help me make this better? Or I'm hearing something and I'm wondering if this statement, this framework, this vision works. Where would you disagree? Often you can kind of further the conversation, and there's trust building that happens in that, because if you are being a facilitator, then often you're coming with a certain neutrality, right? So when people essentially say, no, that's not quite right, you're like, oh, perfect. Tell me more. How can I change this to make it better? And especially if you're with a group that is having a circular conversation and can't move forward, having something for everyone to agree upon in terms of like, this is wrong, can help further that. So that's, I think, a straw man, but also this is where visuals can really play a role in allowing you to do that, even in a situation where there's a clear hierarchy, because hopefully most managers recognize that their role isn't just to steer the ship, it's also to develop you as their junior, which in this scenario might mean helping to further the development of whatever you're asking. So I've just found that that's something that might work.
And can I ask the dumb question in case anyone is sitting out there saying, "What's a straw man?" Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just kind of like something that's like a placeholder. So if you're working on, for instance, a vision statement together and you've sat and heard people speak for about 30 minutes, and then you write in the background, I think this is what you're saying, and you put it up on the screen. What's right about this? What's wrong about this? Essentially, it's
Yeah.
not a final draft.
Awesome. So it's like a model, a placeholder, right? That can be modified.
Thank you,
Thank
Sheri.
you. Awesome.
I was wondering about the dumb question myself, so thank you.
It's all good.
I was like, I know what this means. Um,
Dumb questions are the key to good breakthroughs.
Hey, let me build on it because this is really important, right? So notice what Angela did. She's like, I was wondering that myself, right? That itself is a really, really great way to do some shadow facilitation. Because one of the rules of facilitation is you use yourself as barometer. If something is coming up for me, if I'm sensing something, feeling something, thinking something, chances are somebody else is too. That's the rule of group dynamics. So you can just name, rather than naming what you think might be going on for other people, you might say in the room, hey, I'm feeling like dot, dot, dot. I'm feeling like not everybody's participating in this conversation. I'm feeling like we're not considering all the options. I'm feeling like we're moving too quick to closure, right? And so now it takes a little bit of courage to be able to own that and even to be able to articulate it. But when you do that, it's like, okay, kind of to your point about not my circus, not my monkeys. If you're not facilitating, you can just put that on the rest of the team to solve that, right? And again, people like to fill gaps. So you say something like, hey, I'm sensing we haven't considered all our options here. You are facilitating because you're not owning that. You're putting that back out onto the team to solve.
Yes. Yes, very true. Thank you, Brian, on that.
And I'll add one thing. I think to build upon everybody here, I think the one thing that can really help groups get going in the general direction is, what are we trying to achieve, right? What's the goal? What's the vision? Hey, boss, you just asked us for a response and the feedback here on our recent employee surveys. What are you hoping to get from us, boss? What are you trying to understand?
Yeah, Rachel put, what's the meeting for again?
Yep.
So I'm gonna hop to the next question. That was fantastic. I loved the answer to that, and also the term shadow facilitation now. I'm curious if we'll see it again. So Rachel, you stepped on this. I need some water. Or you already began this a little bit, but no, none of you. It's your choice if you want to do some shadow facilitation. If you step up, when might it not be appropriate to step into that facilitator role, either for yourself or in the group dynamic? I think everybody's gonna leave this meeting and be like, I'm a professional facilitator now, so everything's gonna look like a nail when you have a hammer. When might it be inappropriate? Brian, I saw your expression go from like nodding and then you.
Yeah, I was trying to keep it quiet. I was thinking about something very specific. A few years ago, I was on a team and I was I was facilitating, but in this moment, the facilitation team for this large conference that I was a part of was, doing a little bit of like a mid-process redesign. Okay. And so I was facilitating the conference. I was one of about 5 facilitators, but in this design team meeting, I was a team member. Make sense? Okay. And what was happening is that, we'd gotten some feedback that the approach that we had designed was not working very well for this group. And, we were trying to come up with how do we fix this? Okay. And one of the things that was happening was that in that moment, the boss, if we could say our client, was just swirling, right? They were just going around the drain. And you could tell, back to reading the body language, her stress level on a scale of 1 to 10 was like a 12. I mean, she was really, really just sideways. Okay. And, I tried in that moment to ask, kind of a very gentle coaching type question, which is, well, why don't we zoom back out of this and really focus on what success looked like now? Here's what happened in that moment. One of the other facilitators waved me off, like, don't do it, And so I kind of backed off of that. And I watched the leader kind of consider for a second, but then she just went into this death spiral again. Okay. Now here's what I didn't know. This other facilitator who waved me off worked for this leader. And this leader was kind of, for lack of a better word, they were sort of a political pariah. They were this is not a very well-liked person. She was making people's lives miserable. They didn't like her. I didn't know any better because I was like an outside facilitator that they just brought in. What I didn't know is that this team that I was a part of really wanted this person to fail. And what they
Oh.
didn't want was for me to bail
Oh.
this person out. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, it was vicious, Casey.
Oh, that's it.
It was pretty bad.
Oh, that's
They
wrong.
really wanted, they were kind of making a sport of watching this person fail. Now, I didn't know that, right? And so my little rescue attempt there, it was, the guy that I did work with was like, don't do this, right? Now, bearing something like that, I mean, I think that there is a case, to do a little bit of gentle facilitation, especially if the team is spiraling, if they're not, if they're just kind of talking past each other. But again, if you put the feelers out there and if you send a couple of test balloon questions to say, hey, is anybody noticing that we're really shutting off that side of the room? And if they don't bite, then it's like, okay, there's not a whole lot you can do there. I think what you can do is, yeah, there's a lot of wrong stuff there around. I absolutely agree with you. I wish I had known that going into it. What you can do is after the fact, you can go to whoever is in charge and say, hey, I noticed a couple of things that happened. Would you mind if we discuss them? And if they treat you with a kind of an open mind and open ears, then great, you can have that conversation. But if they're like, no, they're like this all the time, right? There's not a whole lot you can do about that.
Yeah, that's definitely a crazy situation that I hope to never be in. I think going back to kind of the original question, the like becoming a shadow facilitator or taking over, I think it might depend on um, again making the request or putting it out, like putting feelers out there. And then like if someone is like facilitating or struggling, then maybe like during a break or like pulling someone aside, like the person who maybe is in charge, um, or like a side chat or something saying, hey, I have some skills or training in facilitation or something. Would you like me to help? Like just offering it, that kind of directly. And then again, this is really depending on the person, whatever. But like, and sometimes like it is just not you can't take over. Like it's something that you don't want to take over because you really don't want to trample on people. Um, and it's often unless you really are in the position of power and having control. Like as a facilitator, you might want to take over, like you might want to be more directive in your facilitation, but like as a shadow facilitator or as a participant who's just seeing a thing go sideways, I think it requires much more nuance and maybe offering things and kind of like maybe popping up to the wall and starting to take notes or say, hey, oh, I have done this before, I have an idea and those things. But I think sometimes it's putting it out there, making it kind of like fishing. You're kind of putting it out there saying, hey, I have some skills, I have some this, I have some offerings, making a couple requests. But sometimes you just gotta, you know, watch the train wreck, sadly.
I can offer another train wreck scenario, sort of, and also kind of I agree. There are times when you can shadow facilitate definitely off if there is a facilitator or a group of facilitators that are already named and they are in that role and they are struggling, you got to ask. And if they say no, that's when you got to step down. I agree. Like that's as tempting it is, but I can see the solution, but I know, just don't, because that can sort of degrade the trust as well in the views of the participants if you're like pushing on something that's not received well. So I've seen that happen, and it's not helpful.
Right.
And remembering sort of, as facilitators, if you are trying to step into that facilitator role, whether it's in the shadow role or more overtly, your main role is to be in service to the work and to the goals. So if the setting is not right or the group is not receptive, then you're not going to succeed in that. So that's kind of the main thing I would like try to keep in mind. And I won't go into detail, but the other the other nightmare scenario that I've been in a few different rolls in is when the process itself implodes for one reason or another. And oftentimes it's political or, because of things, the emails that you didn't know happened before the meeting. And then there's some weird dynamic going on and some, whatever crap popping up that you just don't have the ability to facilitate because you don't have the background. So when that pops up and you're in that facilitator role, I've had that happen. I've had to basically say, look, we're almost out of time and we're not going to be able to get through this agenda because we've just spent all this time in this other direction. What do you all want to do next? And kind of putting it back in the hands of the group. Like, this is a fail in terms of what we had on our agenda, and then putting it back to them. Where do you want to go from here?
And if you really want to push the edge, you can say, hey, I don't understand what we're trying to do here. Nope. Well, would you mind explaining it to me again? Maybe I'm the only person in the room thinking this. It looks like we're trying to do this. Does that sound wrong? And that's because especially, often as facilitators, we may be in a meeting where we're actually for example, I work in an engineering company and we may be having an all hands meeting and we are vested in it, right? Because we're one of the participants. So it's important in those moments to let people know that, hey, I'm invested in this. I'm trying to figure out what we're trying to do here. And so what did Brian, was it Joe who said a while back, he's borrowing from Dan and Chip Heath, that resistance is often a lack of clarity.
Yes.
So the more clarity we can get in what we're trying to do, the shorter the path to accomplishing it is. Yeah.
Casey, something I'm just noticing, as I've known you for a few years now, but hearing the way you talk about facilitation, your style of facilitation is a lot of times being like making you, when you really put yourself out there and say, I'm going to be the one that might take the hit right now, but I'm just clearing the air. Or you're like, I'm showing the elephant in the room and people will want to shoot you down. But that's just something I'm noticing in your way. You have like a very brave way of going forwards and willing to take that. Like, it's very kind of like, it's the term, I'm not sure if it's magnanimous, but like you're putting yourself out there without saying my ego's going to be hurt by this.
I'll share a quick story. I'm 6'4", 217 pounds, right? I'm a big guy, and I'm a big guy, right? So I stand out. About a dozen years ago, I brought someone on my task. Her name was Pearl, and now she's a behavioral psychologist. Actually, she's a practicing psychologist. She deals with therapy. I brought her. I was working with the Department of Defense at the time, and I brought her in because there was a group of what we call knuckle draggers coming together. These are senior, experienced military people coming together, and they asked me to bring her on. He brought a rake. I'm sorry. And Pearl is 4'11". She's an Asian lady who's 4'11". And she got brought in because my client wanted to actually give her to another client, say, hey, you're short on staff, use her. Here's somebody you can use however she want. And it took him 6 months to get over thinking she was a spy for him, but it's immaterial. Been there for about a month, and they were having an event where they're bringing all these experts from around the Department of Defense together for an event. And about an hour and a half into it, they had a break and they came back. And Pearl stood up in front of this room of 200 seasoned military warriors and veterans and said, hey, I'm Pearl. You don't know me. What are we trying to do today? I'm new and I'm confused. And she eventually said, oh, good. Do you mind if I write down up here what we're trying to do? What are the 3 things we're trying to get out today? And this is someone who's not 6'4". Someone who's 4'11", tiny. That was one of the things of leaning in and being willing to take that hit, because odds are you're not the only person thinking that in the room. Especially if you're invested it's your time and your energy, right? Don't let other people waste your time and your energy, right? If you can, if you're getting nothing out of the meeting, sorry, this is me speaking, leave. So I'm rambling.
Yeah, and I think that's really like embracing a beginner's mindset, either as a true beginner or recognizing that that's what's needed in the room and saying, asking and with curiosity, not with like a leading question. It's like really help me understand. I'm really looking to understand and like that mix of like beginner's mindset and curiosity, and like what Brian was saying earlier, like people answer questions, like people want to fill silences and
So
gaps,
true.
and they want to be experts and explain. So if they like, okay, if you ask the question and as they're like, I had a boss where I'd ask a question, and he would like partly to like sometimes this was I was trying to get him to talk himself out of a decision because he's a really smart guy. And I knew that like he has a good idea, but he just needed a little bit more questions, and he would talk himself out of it or talk himself into it. That's fine too. But he would talk himself through it and move on. And so like I would just ask the question with curiosity and all that stuff. And that was like a magic way to move the process forward.
Yes. By the way, I'm just doing not exactly a temp check, but it is almost. Oh, thank you so much, Casey, for being here. If I wanted to ask one more question, we got another 30 minutes, but if people have to start leaving, it is 6 p.m. here on the East Coast. I'm gonna hop a little bit out down the questions for and just ask kind of like what is the difference? What is the difference between facilitating and simply taking over? Which slash another part of that question could be, what do you do when the facilitator sucks? Which might be what taking over is. Brian, you look like you have stories.
No, I do, but I'll wait. I know other people can certainly speak to this one.
You
Yeah,
put the facilitator in a Godzilla costume is
there
what you
you
do.
go. That's one thing. I mean, okay, let's tackle. I'm sorry, at least you had it. Go for it.
Well, I'm interested in hearing your stories too. But the first thing that came up to me was essentially, I think the difference might be asking permission rather than taking control. I think often when you become an authoritative leader in a space, the implication is that you know where everyone is supposed to go and you are going to make decisions to get them there. And sometimes that's appropriate, but I don't necessarily think that that's facilitation. And so I think for me in particular, when I feel like I've become a facilitator in a space, other people are bought in to me driving process, and particularly process rather than content, I would say.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Sheri?
I totally agree. I think that's a great answer. And I guess for me there's a visual that pops in my head is there's a if there's a straight line, we're here, we're going to present the information, and this is what we're going to do, that you don't need a facilitator for that.
Amen.
That's a
Amen.
plan that's already just in place. If there's a divergence of let's generate some ideas, let's do a little research, let's have some conversations, and then we're gonna come up with an idea or a plan for going forward, that's when you need a facilitator.
And Sheri, I'm going to build upon this. I'm not sure I heard this. This came across. This might come from Tom Peters, where it might come from him. If everything goes to plan, then you really didn't do anything interesting. So,
Right, exactly. Exactly.
and for the interesting things that where you might want to bring someone in who has some expertise and getting people through a process or to an end goal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's just a presentation. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes a thing doesn't actually need to be facilitated. It's just a presentation. It's just sharing information, which probably didn't need to be a meeting, but that's a whole different topic. But I think also sometimes it's like, are you taking over from someone who's already there, or are you taking over from like nothing? Because I've been to like a meeting or like a meetup or like especially more informal things where, again, going back to the thing I said earlier, where people are like, oh, all the adults, everyone will just show up and know what to do. And there's like, it's kind of that assumption.
Mhm.
And so there's a gap because there wasn't any hosting or facilitation.
Mm.
And so like I might kind of take over in those cases and just like facilitate like on a very like as a hosting, like kind of more of a hosting situation. But that's not necessarily like, oh, someone is leading a meeting and doing it maybe not as well as it could be. And like that kind of takeover is, I think, different versus like filling a gap where there's nothing and filling a gap where there is someone trying to do something but doing it badly or not very well.
I think there's a difference between facilitating and facilitators. There's a difference between the two of those. A lot of people think they are facilitators, or when facilitating is actually an act of having people do things. I was working with one of the teams I'm working with. They have a virtual session coming up with some of their clients, and I said, let's run a dry run on what you want to do. I knew the material wasn't ready, so I ran the dry run, and they said the material isn't ready. So I knew it wasn't ready. So I said, I really took them into the hole for them to say, oh, we're not ready to go forward, right? But I didn't have to say to them the material wasn't ready. So let's just dry run it real quick, see how it is. So that was in some ways me subtly taking over to say to them that they weren't ready to go forward.
Um, this isn't this isn't like how I took over or became a facility or like took a facilitation role. But this question, what it brought up for me, and I guess you could call it a nightmare situation, not more like just like a not a great dream, was a time where the facilitator sucked. Was I'm a graphic recorder and I was in a meeting and it was a subcontractor of a contractor, and I was there recording. I thought everything was going well. I went to chat with the facilitator, and he had this expression of, I know my voice is terrible. Um, I had this experience where I went over, I'm like, just chatting, just, enjoying it, enjoying the conversation. And he had this expression of like that, rictus grin of fury on his face as the facilitator. And he was basically like, oh my God, I just want to get this over with. And he was just furious. And apparently later, like the contractor I was working with got some negative feedback about me. And I was like, I think I did great. I think this was the facilitator. Like, I have a feeling there was some dynamic going on. I was very happy not to be a part of. But oh well, yeah, don't strain too much. You'll be sore. Don't worry. I just don't want your ears sore. But anyways, that was experience of like, you know, the facilitator sucked because his mindset was just so, this is a job that I want to be over. Um, and I think it brought down probably the entire meeting.
A simple rule for me is the energy of the room will never raise any higher than the energy of the facilitator. So if you can keep your energy high, the group will follow you, right? Can you imagine if facilitator, if the facilitator walks in and his spine's being sponsored by the letter C, where he's slouching over and he's kind of like in this mode, where do you think the audience is going to go? And that sometimes that's the hardest thing, at least for me, is keeping that energy high. Looks like Angela may have stepped away from us for a moment.
No, I just needed to get water.
Okay. I was about to guess facilitate.
Ryan, I do want to know what story you were thinking. You were being very patient. If you want to move on, that's
Well,
also fine.
no, let's move on. I think I've told enough stories tonight, but yeah, I'll save it for I'll do a good one later. Um,
So Casey, I believe you might need to hop off soon. So if you want to do feel free when you're ready. Um, so
I have, would you mind if I step in and do a little guest facilitation?
oh,
Yeah. Because you have about 25 minutes left of the group here, and I think you have like 8 questions left.
we're not going to
Uh,
get through them. That's completely fine.
You might want to post the questions in chat and let the people say, hey, what do you want us to talk about?
Let me do that then.
That might be one way to, hey, we're about to post some questions in chat. And hey, of these, hey, which one of you do you want to hear from? You got some people here, or that might be one thing that might be helpful. Or if you want, I could do that for you.
Yeah, I'm trying to post right now. There's too many words, but let me see if I can do the first 9 and then I'll do the next ones after. There. And
Yeah.
and I'm in this case, I'm gonna ask if people want to come off mute and say what they really want to hear, either that or post in chat. Take over the room and give my voice a break. I get laryngitis every time I get sick, by the way. That's why I don't care at this point.
Casey Sterling.
Yes,
Yes.
sorry.
Wait, I don't reckon who's that? I don't. Where's the
Beard's gone.
Oh, looks
Yes.
fabulous, my friend.
So a question I'm curious to ask is, how do you all use your facilitation skills in your personal lives?
Oh, pick me.
Brian,
Yeah,
tell
thank you.
us.
So as some of you might know, I have 4 kids. Recently I have, I also have now a mother-in-law who has been staying with us, following some surgery, and of course, my wife. And so it's a full house. And what's interesting is that my kids, well, between everybody, I have all of the 4 temperaments represented. And so if you want to dive deep into that, we can nerd out on temperaments. But it's really, really interesting because we can, I actually get to kind of experiment with new facilitation methods with my children, just to see how they'll react. And oftentimes I get all of the things that we get in the room. I get wholehearted endorsement. I get open resistance. I get kind of lukewarm reception, right? And it's like, it's a real kind of interesting incubator and laboratory for me to try new stuff out. And it usually happens over the dinner table, right? Just this week. So my wife likes to do this thing called highs and lows, where we do a go around at the table and everybody shares their highs and lows. And, some of my kids who are a little bit more closure minded will be like, all right, here's what happened. Here's my high. Here's my low. Next, done. Right. And then I have others that are a little bit more emergent, that they tend to kind of like the spotlight and sort of talk around things. And so I actually came up with this highs and low clock, right? It's like this timer on an app. And I used it a couple of times where it's like it would do like a random select of, somebody who was at the table. It'd give them 90 seconds to talk about whatever they want to, then a 5-second transition, then it would go on to the next time. Well, what was interesting is that this week I set the timer down where my wife kicked off highs and lows, and 3 people, I won't say who it was, said, oh, no. We don't want to use this timer again. Can't we just have a conversation? Let's not use the timer. I was like, okay, fine. Let's see how this goes. And one of my kids picked up the ball on talking about their highs and lows. And about 5 minutes later, when they were still talking, the rest of my kids were like, yeah, we want the timer back on. So, I like to use, my family as a way of like testing out new methods. So that's how I use it.
I would say that one of the ways I use it in my personal life, and actually, like, is I tend to, I guess, join a lot of groups and things, and also want to create and organize, like a lot of events and workshops I want to be a part of. And so actually, sometimes I joined a board game meetup that isn't really hosted or facilitated. I actively was like, I want to be a participant, so I'm going to actively not facilitate. I'm going to let it be maybe not as well run as I could run it. I could like do things. And so it's kind of a weird way of me choosing not to facilitate so that I could really be a participant. Because you can't really be a participant and facilitate like at the same time. But that's actually one way I kind of use it. And even just, again, I think all these skills, they just start like just getting into life, even the questions I ask, how I phrase things, how I design, just even things, the way I think about things. So it just really just kind of filters into life in ways that I'm not even sure how I've noticed explicitly. But I think it definitely, if I were to think about it, are very just everywhere.
It's also intention, just the intention of like when to choose.
Yeah. I can go unless Elise, if you wanted to go next, or should I go? Okay. Um, so my family, I have two teenage boys, excuse me, two teenage boys and a husband who is on the shy side, let's say. And so all three are totally allergic to having family conversations. It's like, it's like I'm pouring scalding water on them when I say, let's have a family conversation. No, right? So my way of facilitating with my family, if we have to plan something like a vacation or anything that I want to get everybody's input, I use visual tools. I use no, I use shared tools. So, I have teenage boys. They both have phones now. So if I can put it in an app, I have a better chance of getting a response. And it'll be like here, I've created a draft of the things that we could do this weekend. Cross out the ones that you're not interested in, check the ones that you are interested in, for example, or add to the list. We're in the college search, so we're going to be using a similar tool. So it's asynchronous, it involves technology, and nobody has to talk. Those are the keys for my family.
I love that. I would say that uh, my answer, I think, encompasses a lot of what's already been said. I think that facilitation seemed to be kind of a role and methodology that extends some of what my strengths already are. And so, I mean, there are tools, there are methods, but like at the base layer of myself as a facilitator is just an intuition and particular values and a desire for harmony again and again. And so I find that, like Rachel, I often have to make decisions in moments in terms of whether I want to step into that or not. um, but I find also that, like Brian, I end up getting ideas and testing out things with folks because my friends and family have come to know me for not just my ability to listen or to ask good questions, but also to help them translate their thoughts and ideas into something. And so I mean, I think, yeah, I think it just kind of naturally comes up with people that I love. And so it's a continual practice ground, but also there, I find myself also having to think about boundaries and how to to set them and enforce them, which is a lifelong uh, uh, challenge for me. So.
That's, I understand why you want to set boundaries with that. Man, I wish that my family was open, would be open to that. But at the same time, I understand it's not all sunshine and roses. Brian's on our plane now. He's happy.
Yeah, I'm cracking up because he's in the seat. And it's really loud on the plane, apparently.
Um, is there, if you have any, if the panelists have anything else to say, please just say it. If not, is there anyone in the chat that, not in the chat, in this call that has other questions they would like answered from the ones I put, or in the last 15 minutes, do you have questions of your own that I haven't written down that you are really hoping to be answered during this call? Give it a few seconds. So I'm gonna hop in, just because this was touched on before, and I think that it sounds like it's something that you just gain over time. But do you have more tips and tricks about reading the energy in the room? Is it really mainly body language, or are there other things that are really good indicators?
I would I would say body language is a really good one. And also just like you can do this just people watching, especially other groups when you're not facilitating, because then you're not trying to do multiple things at the same time. You can get kind of practice one skill, especially watching group dynamics just out and about. Airports are great for this. Like how are people talking to each other? Kind of, can you, I was like, can you guess how they know each other? And I mean, you're totally making up stories because you don't know these people, but I think that's a good way to kind of practice those skills is more of an observer when you're only kind of working on that one thing and noticing it, and in like smaller groups and just sometimes stepping back, or as Brian says, up onto the balcony, looking around the room and be like, all right, just what am I noticing, and asking that question around like the group dynamics, the body language, how are people talking to each other, um, a lot of those things. So I think that's a good way to kind of start get practicing noticing the energy, and then because sometimes you're like you want to be heads down, but other times like intentionally be like, this is I'm paying attention to this right now.
I like watching conversations of people who I can't either hear or speak a language I don't hear or know, because it's fun to try to figure out like what kind is this a couple that's having an argument? And you'll never know, but it's a fun experiment to see. And it's fun, you can be like, oh, these people are having drama I have no idea about. It's fun to make things up.
I would say also as an official facilitator, sometimes you can actually make it easier on yourself by giving people props to signal how they're feeling, or doing a temperature check in the middle of a designed session. Um, but I would also say when you're not the official facilitator, and you happen to know that you want to do some shadow facilitation in an upcoming meeting, right? I think spending some time with people to understand their priorities and pain points beforehand, whether in a formal way or an informal way, helps you have a bit more accuracy when you're reading people's body language and other forms of communication in a room, right? Because a silence can mean I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm over this, or it could mean, man, they touched on a sensitive point that I don't necessarily want to express, but if you, as the shadow facilitator, know that exists, maybe you can voice it on their behalf. And so, yeah, just a couple of things that came up for me.
Yeah, I love all those ideas. Um, and I had something that just went out of my head. Um, I guess when you're facilitating, oh, sorry, self-distracted here. What was the question again? What's our goal?
I think maybe I can talk while you. I think another thing, if you like to practice kind of the nonverbal or like the reading the room skills, I think sometimes it might be like also like thinking back to a meeting you either were a part of or were facilitating, and kind of just running it through again and being like, okay, like what did I notice? What did I miss? And like just have it, especially like doing a debrief basically either with yourself or with someone else. And like what did other people observe? If you can do that with someone else there, that might be a good way to just kind of tune that dial too.
Thank you for that moment. I remembered what I was going to say. There's so many good ideas. They're all pushing each other out of my brain. So I guess another thought is finding the advocate in the room, or finding the like oftentimes you get a sense of, oh, that's somebody who looks super comfortable, they're chatting with everybody. There might be somebody who has more longevity in the group. So finding an opportunity, well, first off, kind of if you're kind of trying to come up the learning curve on reading that room, coming up with your own theory or your own hypothesis. Oh, here's where I think the energy is at, and then pulling that person aside. Hey, I think I'm kind of getting this vibe of this. Is that right? Kind of checking with that individual, or or if you're not comfortable asking that question to the group, to the entire group, that would be another option. And I guess one other thing that I've done often when I'm leading workshops or whatever is I'll have multiple options for different points during the workshop, and depending on where the energy is going to go, it might be the more high energy thing, or it might be the quick, let's get up and shake like we're, I don't know, beavers or something. I don't know. So like having multiple options, and ask the group, would you rather do this at this point or this? And there are different energy level kinds of activities, and let them choose, or do a show of hands or something like that. So you can literally ask them indirectly where they're at.
If I go back on mute quickly, it's just because they're doing yet another announcement. Back to the idea of how do you get good at reading the room and sensing energy. I think another thing is that if you're not the facilitator, it's a great opportunity for you to put your anthropologist hat on. And one thing that you can do is to think of your favorite model for people. It could be, for example, who are my openers, who are my refiners, who are my closers, right? And you can map out, okay, I'm hearing an opening, a refining, or a closing. Or it could be who is on the line of inquiry, who's on the line of advocacy. It could be who is sensing and who is intuiting, right? It could be what are the temperaments that I'm hearing. But like pick one model and use the meeting that you're in as a chance to identify those speech acts that you're hearing from people. And in that way, you kind of, you calibrate your instrument as a way of sensing like where is the energy and where are the dynamics moving in the room, so that when you are the facilitator, you know what to do with it.
I completely agree with that. And it's interesting. It's interesting because figuring out what's in the room and the type of people in the room, and it describes the dynamics of what the team is actually accomplishing. Let's see, I'm looking through the questions. We have about 10 minutes left. If somebody has something that they want specifically answered, put in the chat. Erin, I know that you've had a lot of great like pieces of feedback and such, so feel free to ask anything. So for the facilitators, if there's any question you wanted to answer, Sheri, I saw you come off mute. Please take it away.
Yeah, can I pick one? I'm curious what people say about how do you manage the dominant voices and draw out the quiet participants. I'm curious what you all have to say about
I'm going to see if I can do a quick hit on this. So Sheri, I appreciate your contribution. You're carrying a lot of the load of this conversation. I'd like to give other people the chance to carry the load as well. And so what that does is it doesn't shame, it honors your contribution, and it sends a pretty clear message. You need to make space for other people.
That Brian's so good at that.
I love using written communication. And so asking people to stop, think, and write their ideas first, especially if it's on a shared space, right? Then make sure everybody gets to contribute to a question before folks start talking. And then that also enables me as a facilitator to identify who hasn't been able to voice their thoughts and call on them.
Yeah, I love that too. And also just like sometimes like a pair share where it's so people have it's like it's making it so it's not the whole group. It's like everyone has a chance to talk, and then asking like what did you hear your partner say? What did you hear someone else say? So that you're not talking about what you said you're talking about what you heard, which is a little bit more, it just allows either someone who's really comfortable talking maybe to amplify someone else's thought if or something like that. Just like allows for some flexibility there.
Awesome.
Sometimes also as the official facilitator, not necessarily unofficial, it's useful to think about and ask about dynamics that already exist, power dynamics. And so, I mean, it could be a leader or it could be the hippo, the highest paid person in the room, right? And like pulling them aside and saying, hey, listen, your ideas have a lot of weight here, and we want to make sure that we don't just default to what you say. So could you be on my team and essentially let this conversation happen a bit before you contribute. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but it can be useful.
Cool. Thank you. I think what I tried to do in a recent meeting was they write it, read it, post it, so that knowing that there were going to be a lot of people with a lot of big thoughts and a lot of ideas, and we only had a short period of time, I gave them small stickies and big markers, and I said, what you write has to fit on this, so reduce it to a phrase. They didn't all hold to it, but it was, I got the point across, and they could only read the post-it, put it on the board in the space that was, that matched the theme that it matched with, and then sit down and let the next person talk. Sort of worked. But, same meeting later on, there were still voices that tried to dominate. So, you got to have multiple tools.
Angela, we can't hear you.
A question that's probably better with the sound. With the something I was curious about is with great facilitation comes great responsibility. What are the responsibilities of a facilitator? And that also goes with mindset. What's the should?
I'm gonna quote Brian here. I think as a facilitator, you can't take a group further than you can bring them back from. And so it's awareness about your skills, and like if the room really has a lot of dysfunction and power dynamics and like shit going down, sometimes you're like, I'm not the best athlete for this. This is outside my skill set. And really acknowledging that, I think, is important, and like a part of the responsibility of a facilitator.
I think as we've discussed throughout this conversation, neutrality is a big one. You asked previously, like, when is it inappropriate to be a facilitator? And I would say if you have like a personal relationship to the conversation or the outcome and you don't think you can be neutral, I think it's inappropriate to be a facilitator in that context. But also alongside that is psychological safety, and making sure that you are empowering all of the voices in the room and not just the most dominant ones.
Absolutely. There's just a different way of saying what you just said, but not pushing your own agenda. If you have a horse in the race, you need to step down.
So I'm gonna ask one more question for the last 2 minutes, and this is just curiosity because of death by PowerPoint. Can facilitation replace PowerPoints in meetings? Does it have that power?
Yes. I think also it goes back to the purpose of the meeting. Um, and if it's a PowerPoint-based meeting, it might not need to be sorted because it's just an info dump, which is a different thing, but it absolutely can replace. It goes back to the purpose of the meeting and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I would say that there is some information that can be communicated very effectively through graphic facilitation. I do think that there's a time and a place for PowerPoints, and maybe I'm saying that because I'm a consultant, but I will say for sure, I do think that facilitation has so much value in like activating information, whereas PowerPoints often just communicate to an audience that you don't necessarily expect to engage with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that really goes back to also the purpose. So so Brian will use PowerPoint. He'll use it as a drawing tool, as a way to, refocus the attention onto this thing, which it can be used. I think it can be used as a good tool in facilitation, but it is not like, a lot of PowerPoint slash meetings are just presentations, which is
You
different.
have to be sure that your client is okay with you drawing on their fancy screens.
Very true. The first or second facilitation I ever did, I didn't have the right markers, so I did Sharpie, and I got Sharpie on the mirrors. Um, it was in a gym. Um, Last question. This is just the wrap up. Thank you everybody for being here. Any recommendations from any of you for non-facilitators who might find themselves in a situation where a facilitator is needed, or just maybe general tips and tricks for people wanting to learn what facilitation is and how to do it? And thank you for the donations, by the way, to Nova Scribes. It supports scholars and people really learning about visual facilitation and facilitation in plain and graphic recorders.
I'm going to give a quick answer to your question, and then I'm going to jump off because I need to get to another thing. So quick tips: ask a lot of questions, mirror back what you're hearing and think you're experiencing from the group, and remember it's not about you, and both the good and the bad. You know, you're trying to be a channel or a conduit, and what happens in the group is not a reflection of you personally. If you are doing, putting out your best self and you know, doing doing the things, asking the questions, and trying to help the group, it is we sometimes it's helpful to remember not everything is in our control, no matter how experienced of a facilitator you are. So if you're jumping in and taking that role, grabbing the baton and trying to take it to the next step, that's better than if nobody did that. So, applaud anybody who steps into that role. It's not easy as a newbie. I'm going to be a newbie for the rest of my life, I'm sure. So, thank you for coordinating this. And Angela, you're still on mute or back on mute.
Yep. Hey, have a great night. Thank you so much. Okay. Does anyone else want to speak, or is this a good time to wrap up? Brian's good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I would add is to be aware of what your skills are and what you're trying to do, and to like give yourself low stakes places to practice as you're kind of building those skills, being intentional about it.
I would echo Rachel, practice, because I think probably one of the biggest skills are active listening and great question asking. And that's something that you can do in your daily life and build confidence around using those tools to lead people.
And I would say follow up with any of us if you liked what you heard. I mean, we're all on this call because we want to pay it forward. We're all the beneficiaries of somebody who helped us and trained us and got us to where we are. Connect with us on LinkedIn. You know, we all do mentoring in one way or another. We all have coaching conversations. And so there's something we can do to help out your practice. Please reach out. We would love to help you.
This is true. This is the most generous community I've ever met. And with that, I'm going to be generous and let everybody have the rest of their nights. This is Nova Scribes. We're partnered with IFVP. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great night or a great morning if it's past midnight for some of you. I'm going to go get some water. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, Angela.